Okie dokie. Looks like there's like about 14 people hanging out. So if anybody wants to pop in the chat, definitely do that. I got another monitor going here so I can see what's going on. I am not 100% sure what I'm going to work on today. So what I wanted to do was kind of take a peek at where things are at and identify what kind of my main next goals are and figure out what steps we can take that'll get us a little bit closer to those goals. Sounds like I have my other screen is playing my own audio back. Screw you, TJ. I'm not doing any favicons. I got the favicon going on the other side. I could put it on this one easily now. Anyways, let's kind of see what's going on here. If I can type. I spilled Gatorade on my good keyboard yesterday. And in trying to clean the keys, I broke the D key. And yeah, so now I'm using the magic keyboard with the horrible arrow keys. So this is going to be interesting. I ordered another one of those stupid, no longer made, short Apple keyboards with the good arrow keys last night. So hopefully that'll show up soon. So the last time I did any streaming, we were working on like some client-side image preview stuff here. So that's all kind of working now. But the things that aren't working are this whole concept of being able to publish a product. So right now, products are not publishable. There's no UI to publish them, but there's some conditions that have to be in place before a product can be published. In an earlier version I had of this app, when I was first kind of hacking on a prototype, everything related to the product was in one form, which included a bunch of the stuff that should be in this webhook screen that currently doesn't exist. So right now, for a product to be publishable, you need to have a webhook endpoint set up and a webhook secret set up. Not necessarily a secret, but it needs to be possible. So I decided to split these two screens up because I wanted this edit form to feel kind of like the actual checkout form. So it felt like you're kind of live editing the actual checkout. And I also anticipate that there's going to be more settings related to some of these things that need to show up. So it seemed like giving the webhook stuff its own home was a reasonable idea because I want to show the webhook logs there. So all the webhooks that were fired, as well as being able to retry any failed ones and stuff like that. So I wanted to put all that on one sort of screen. How do I like YouTube versus Twitch? I don't know yet. I've used Twitch mostly, but a few people recommended YouTube because you get the automatic closed captioning stuff. I planned on exporting all of these to YouTube anyways, so doing it directly on YouTube seems easy. I don't do any gaming or anything, so I don't really have any other motivation to be on Twitch. The other thing that's nice about YouTube Live is that people can rewind while the stream is still live, which you can't do with Twitch. So if someone comes on this stream and we've already been going for 15 minutes, they can start back at the beginning without having to wait for the whole thing to be over, which is kind of cool. So I thought I would try YouTube for a little bit because it seemed, fine for coding stuff versus gaming stuff or whatever. So we'll see how it goes. If it turns out that it's significantly worse, then I can go back to Twitch. But for now, it seems fine. So anyways, in order to make products publishable, they need to have a webhook setup. So I'm going to bust open SQL Pro, and you can kind of see what is in place here. So if we look here, I can say that the Twitch UI is quite, confusing. Can you rewind the video live on Twitch? I couldn't get that working when I tried it. Also, I have the chat on the right on YouTube versus scrolling down. Depends if you're in that theater mode or not. And you can also pop the chat out. Anyways, again, we'll see how it goes. So this is the products table. It's pretty simple. Eventually, this is going to get split up into multiple tables, I predict. But you have this webhook URL and then a possible secret key, which is used to generate the HMAC signature for a webhook. So right now, if I was to go and create a new product by going here and doing something like, say, I don't know. Last time we were using this dog food example, which I think is fine. So if we create a product called dog food, and then we try to find some sort of image, we'll go through my whole downloads here, which is always terrifying. See if I can find a dog food one. Here we go, dog food. There we go. And we say it's expensive, like $99. The best dog food on earth. And we'll just leave the default. We'll leave the theme color empty, so it just uses the default. So it looks like we have a product. And if we head over here and refresh this, we do have dog food created. But you can see there's no webhook URL, there's no secret key, and there's also no published at date. So if we were to try and go to the checkout URL for this, which we can get to by going here, and this copy URL thing was me hacking on the UI. This actually just goes to the checkout page right now. You can see that we actually get an error because it's not published, so it's not visible. So let's see what we can do about that. So the next step to kind of making this publishable is to create a form for the webhook stuff. So again, all this used to be in one form. Now we're going to split it up. We write a bunch of tests and stuff and try and do things properly. So here I have this create product test. This used to be a lot more complicated because you used to have to specify everything to create a product. But right now, you only have to specify a name, and then you get dumped into an edit view. So we're going to want to add a test for updating product webhook settings. I'm not using Bootstrap, but most of the CSS is Bootstrap inspired. I used to use Bootstrap a lot. There's some things I didn't quite like about it. When they switched to Sass, that saddened me because I like Less a lot more. So I just kind of took the pieces that I liked, ported them over to Less, rewrote everything kind of from scratch, but maintained a lot of the same sort of naming structure. So you see things like form control as a familiar class, or the column naming and stuff like that. So it's pretty similar. But it's nice to have my own thing that I can kind of edit and feel like I'm doing things in a way that makes sense to me. So we want to be able to go to some webhook page here, put some stuff into a form, and have it save it for this new product. So the way I'm going to start that is by driving out an endpoint. So I'm going to take this update product test, which is a lot more code than we need, but I'm going to save a copy of this as update product webhook test. And we use database migrations. Valid params is not going to be a helper that we're going to need for this because it's only going to have 2 fields. So we'll actually just get rid of everything. We'll keep some of these for the sake of making sure I don't forget about certain things. But all right, so I'm going to copy, or I'm going to delete out all the content of this requires authentication one. I want to leave that there just so I remember that that's something we should test for this. And here's the test that I had for updating all the product details. So updating the name, price, description, all that stuff. All we want to do is update the webhook stuff. So let's think about how we're going to write that. So I don't have to worry about storage or anything. We're going to have a user because the user needs to have that product belong to them. So we'll have a factory for our user class. And we don't need to specify any details about them. And then the product is also going to be created from a factory. So one thing that I want to look at is what I'm currently using to create products, like what default stuff I have. So it looks like my factory is generating a lot more information than necessary. So normally you only want your factories to generate basically the bare minimum necessary for the record to save to the database. Because you don't want to be depending on any of that stuff in the test. If something actually matters, you want to specify it in the test. But with this app, because of the fact that every column except name is nullable, because basically this can be in like an unpublished or draft state, right? So even the description, price, and all that stuff is required to publish, it's not required to save. I'm trying to decide whether I want my factory to return a publishable product or not. I think we can do that with a state. So I can never remember the syntax for this or the method call. So if we look at factory states, factory state, model name, name. Okay, so let's add a factory state for app product class. Let's take a closure here. I never use this faker thing, so I don't usually even bother passing it in. We need to specify the name too, right? Second parameter. So in this case, I'm going to call it publishable. So I can have a separate factory that can generate products that are fully filled out, which is going to be useful for a lot of situations, I'm sure. And then I can strip down the main factory to only have the name and the foreign key. So let's copy this whole thing for now. And I don't think we need a name or a user ID because they get merged in. And here we can just use description. All right, so what I'm going to do is break these annotations for a second and just make sure that the test suite's passing. Cannot declare subdomain. I wonder why that's getting pulled in twice. I added a helper for subdomain routing that I was playing with, which was kind of cool. But I'm actually not even using it now because the thing that I put on the subdomain, I moved over to another repository. So let's just see if that fixes everything. No tests found because that's because we made them fake. What's your take on skipping the create store methods and having the create new button create and save a new empty model and redirect you to the edit form right away? I think that can work. I think that's more of a product decision than like a code decision. I don't like the idea of creating completely empty records. Like I've worked on apps before or played with apps before where like if I was here and I hit this add product button, it takes me to a new page and that product has an ID already. And it feels kind of wasteful to be able to press a button and create records in a database instantly, even if I'm just doing it because I'm clicking around in the UI and not trying to do anything meaningful. I feel like Typeform does this, and so do a couple other apps. So I like this kind of compromise where it's like specify at least a name, and then we can save it with the name, and you can edit from there. So anyways, tests are all passing, so we can go back here. So we want to update a product webhook. So this is not going to be a publishable product. So we can just create a product. We'll at least specify the user ID. Oh man, the arrow keys on this Magic Keyboard, which is what's on the new MacBook Pros, are horrendous. I can never even hit the right key. I literally have 3 keyboards in front of me all plugged in case I arbitrarily decide that it's driving me too crazy that I have to switch. But with that broken D key on the other keyboard, it's kind of rough. But you know what? I think I'm going to switch because this is driving me crazy. All right. I'll just be very careful with the D key. All right. So here we go. Back to the good keyboard. So I'm going to get rid of this annotation so this just doesn't run. And we don't want to call this updating a product. We want to say I'm adding a webhook URL to a product. So let's create the product and explicitly set the webhook URL to null so that we know, yes, we're starting with like a product that hasn't had the webhook set yet. And then we want to make some sort of request, right? So the way that I usually think about this. If we're going to be putting this on a separate screen, then it feels like it should get its own endpoint. It shouldn't just be like a patch request to like products 6. So maybe we do something like a patch request to like the nested webhook settings property, something like that. So if we make a patch request here, we can set the webhook and we can set the secret. And that seems like maybe a reasonable place to start. Eventually, I'm going to support multiple webhooks and stuff. But again, that's going to change things, but we'll not worry about that for now. So if we do something like this, patch to products / we use interpolation here, product ID / webhook settings, and pass through a webhook URL of http example.com. Then I think what we want to do is capture that response. I'm still not used to this. I like it better than what we had before, but it's not instinctive to start these calls by creating that variable. So let's do a response assert status. Is there an updated status code? Probably an OK. Just a 200. Seems fine. I probably could stream to Twitch and YouTube at the same time. I don't know. I'll have to try it out. What is it that you don't like about watching on YouTube? Just out of curiosity. Trying to get a better understanding so I can make the best possible decision. We start a 200 status and verify that the webhook got updated. So let's do something like, actually, one other thing we should do is make sure that we are authenticated as that user. So let's do that first. Acting as user. Whoa. The big mic in my face, sometimes it's hard to see the keyboard. Okay, so let's do something like this. Assert equals http example.com product fresh, just so we know that we're working with an updated product, and get the webhook URL. So this seems like the simplest sort of case to test. So let's just run it and see what we get. Not found exception. Cool. Let's head back to our routes file. And I'm going to keep this outside of this middleware to start, just because that'll make sure that we don't forget to add a test for the auth stuff. So let's add a patch request to /products/ID/webhook. Oh man, my D key just snapped off in a weird way. It's so depressing. And one thing that I like to do for this stuff that I talked about on Full Stack Radio once with Taylor was creating a lot more controllers than people are normally used to. So if I have something like this patch request to this webhook settings thing, a lot of people might put that in the products controller, but then the products controller gets really kind of unwieldy. So what I would rather do here is create like a product webhook settings controller that only job is to deal with this stuff. And we'll do that at update. So if we run this now, we should get an error that there's no controller. So we can make that artisan make controller product webhook settings controller. Product webhook settings controller. Get that open. Run this again. Should be no update method. Yeah. Okay. So let's create the update method. And right now this is just going to take the product ID. I think I might have some route model binding stuff set up? Nope. So one thing about route model binding that I always thought was interesting is, it seems like a useful feature at first, but in this case it's not that useful because I can't really use it to bind the product because I have to make sure I get it through the user. I guess the alternative would be to get the product and then use an authorization rule in the controller. But that does multiple database queries. So it seems kind of wasteful in this case where things are not really that complicated. And to switch to theater mode, if you just hover your mouse over top of the video and look in the bottom right, there should be a little square. And when you hover over it, it says theater mode. By square, I mean rectangle. Okay, tests. Failed asserting that null matches expected HTTP example.com. So, it didn't get updated. So, let's do something like product equals product find. I like to write code that I know is not correct, but will make the tests pass to force myself to write tests for other things that I know are important. For example, I want this to throw a 404 if I pass in an ID that doesn't exist. I could go ahead and do find or fail right now, but then I might forget to write a test to prove that I get the 404 because I've already covered it without forcing myself to write a test. So I know that using this version of it doesn't give me that 404 behavior, so I'm forced to write a test to fix this to find or fail. So that's an approach that I like to take a lot. Same with the fact that we're just finding the product directly instead of fetching it through the user, since we want this to be only products that you own. So we can find the products. We can do something like product update, Webhook URL is request, Webhook URL. Again, there's no validation or anything like that, right? Because we want to force ourselves to write tests for that. And once the product is updated, we can return, I guess probably return the, no, I guess in this case we want to return a redirect, now that I think about it. Well, depends how we implement this. We could do it as a full page refresh, which would be like a fast way to do it. Or we could do it as like a view little client-side Ajax thing. I think I'm trending towards eventually doing basically everything on the client side, like in terms of form submissions and stuff. So maybe we can do it that way. For now, let's just have it return the product, since that'll get us that 200. And run this test. Let's see what we get. Product not found. Get that imported. Okay, so we're green. So I'll add a commit now. Let's create a branch. Update webhook settings. So I'll show you how I like to do this stuff a lot of the time. So when I get a test passing, I usually make a commit. So I go in here. I'm perfectly fine, but oftentimes it's nicer to look at here to kind of get an idea of what changed in case there's anything I want to do in a separate commit. A classic example is actually here where we deleted this subdomain call. I could just bake that into this commit, but it's not really related. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to not commit anything except this delete. So I'm not even going to add this route here. And we'll say remove unused subdomain helper. And now we can look at what's here and make sure that everything seems relevant to what we're trying to do. Even this feels like a separate commit to me. Add publishable state for product factory. Okay, now the rest of this stuff feels like it's related to the feature. So basically, we added the ability to add a webhook to a product. Support adding webhook to product. And then I'll make some notes here like needs authentication or missing authentication check. Validation etc. So it's just kind of the very first version of that. So let's go ahead and think about what the next test that we want to write is. So okay, I'm going to copy this test and say something like test cannot, or test requires authentication. So if we try to do it without this, then this is always one of those debates. Do you want to throw a 404 to make sure that no one can tell the difference between resources that exist and resources that don't? Or do we want to say unauthorized because it requires being authenticated to hit that route at all? I think probably a 401 is better in this case, and then a 404 for when you are authorized but it's not yours. So we'll do that. Then if we want to, we could also verify that the webhook URL is still null, like to make sure that the authentication check happened early. That's something I kind of flip-flop on sometimes. So we could either do this, right? Verify that the webhook is null, which means that this bailed before that code ran. But a lot of the time I'll just leave this out altogether too, because I sort of know that those checks are going to happen before any controller code runs. But let's leave it there for now. So let's just run this. And we get a failure because we got a 200 back because we didn't declare that route inside of our auth middleware group. So let's stick that up in here and see if that gets us passing. Unauthenticated. So that means we can do this with exception handling to allow the middleware to catch that and turn it into expected status code 401, but received 302. So is that just what the auth middleware does by default? It tries to redirect you to the login screen, I guess. I guess that's... If we're going to make this a JSON thing, then is patch JSON a method? Yeah. So if we do patch JSON, then I bet you this will be a 401, right? Yeah, okay. So let's update this one to be patch JSON too, since we're going to do this with like a client-side sort of deal. So it looks like the whole file is good. All right, let's add another commit. Require authentication to add webhook URL to products. Next thing, you can't update someone else's product webhook, which we don't have a test for right now. So right now, if we try to make the product belong to somebody else, this will still pass. Cannot update another user's product webhook. So let's create other user. The product will belong to them. And we'll say current user is the same. So with exception handling, acting as current user, patch to the other user's product, some valid stuff. And I think in this case, I actually want a 404 so that people can't detect that that product even exists. Oh, Caleb said something and then he deleted it. I think he learned something and was embarrassed. Unique constraint failed. That's annoying. So we can fix that in our model factory. So right now my model factory is it's hard coding the user. So let's do faker say female. I think that's right. That'll make an email address that if we accidentally send an email to it, it won't cause any problems. Expected 404, but got a 200. Big fan of spectacle. Okay, back to the code. This is I tried doing the pairing screen hero thing the other day, which I thought was really fun. I actually like it more than doing it by myself, because if I do it by myself, I'm tempted to like look at chat, respond to chat, and people watching the video have no fucking clue what's going on in chat. So it's nice if I can just talk to somebody else and kind of like look at the chat once in a while, but not try to interact with it constantly. So again, we're expecting a 200, or we're expecting a 404, but we got a 200. So let's do auth user products find or fail and pull this in. Yeah, I don't use the pop out either. Okay, green. So we can got some good stuff in here for kind of our authorization rules and stuff. Right now this is going to fail if someone, well, this is an interesting situation. So if someone tries to pass in, or someone hits this endpoint and they don't provide a webhook URL, that will clear out the webhook URL, set it back to null or empty, which maybe is what we want, because otherwise you have this weird state where when a product is first created, the webhook URL field can be empty, right? Which is what we see here. But as soon as you save it once, there's no way to like empty it out. So you probably do want to be able to empty it out. So maybe it's best to document that explicitly with a test at least. So let's run another test here. We'll say can clear out existing webhook URL. So if you have a user, we have a product. Let's say that the product has a webhook URL, example.com. We want to make a patch request where we set the webhook URL to null. And then we want to make sure that this did, in fact, get cleared to null. This should pass already, I think. Yeah. So that's fine. I wonder what should happen if they don't pass the webhook URL. It's one of those cases where, like, if you want it to like support proper patch requests where people can specify like just individual fields, we would want someone to be able to update one field without clearing out the other one if it wasn't provided. However, I don't intend to implement it that way. Like, I don't intend my app to ever send a request that doesn't contain either the webhook URL that was already there or an explicit empty one. So since I don't want to support that, I'm just going to not even write a test for it, and the app will clear it out, and that will be someone else's problem for using like a REST client or something to try and manipulate the application. Okay, so the other thing that we want to do is be able to specify this secret key. So we have to make a decision, like, do we want to consolidate that into one test where we update the webhook URL and the secret at the same time? I think so. I think that's probably good. Let's move this test up here and update this, adding a webhook URL and secret. So we'll have like one kind of happy path test that does both. I think it's just called secret key. And then we can use, well, actually, you know what? This is right, because the app is only ever going to send both, because both fields are going to be there in the form. So we can just say, like, my secret key. And I don't want to fresh this twice, so we'll throw it in a tap. We can say tap, product, fresh, function, product. This will be the secret key. Let's make sure that's still okay. So failed asserting that null matches my secret key. Oh, that's interesting. I would have expected the ads thing would be the other way around. I was actually kind of worried that YouTube is going to put ads and everything where Twitch wouldn't, but if Twitch does too. Yeah. Interesting. All right. So I'm realizing that we don't even need to have validation on this endpoint because both fields are optional. So I'm trying to think, is there anything that we would want to validate? Maybe we want to validate the webhook URL as a real URL. We can specify that in another test. Okay, so I'm going to do something like this. Oh my god, this D key is so bad. Okay, my secret key. We'll pass that through both times so it's clear that like someone just deleted the webhook URL field. And I'm going to copy this assertion. So we'll assert null on the webhook URL, but we'll verify that the secret key didn't get changed or stayed what it should be. Let's run that. Still good. I'll add another one for being able to clear out the secret key. So we can duplicate this. Set this one to null. And duplicate this stuff. Anything to avoid typing. And move this up here. Change that to secret key. Delete this line and these. So we have a secret key. We set no secret key. Verify that the URL is still there. Secret key is gone. Yeah, that's a good suggestion. Let's refactor that. Let's wait till we're done, then look at refactoring. I want to add one more thing, which is validation for the webhook URL being a URL. So let's copy this. Let's just duplicate it, actually. Oh, man. Duplicate being on my broken D key is depressing me. Okay, webhook URL must be a valid URL, just so we can test some validation stuff for fun here. Doesn't really matter what we start with here. I think I'm actually going to add back, if you remember at the beginning, I had that valid params helper. It's more useful for things where you have a lot of fields, but even in this case, I think it helps clean up some noise. This is like a factory that I use for like request bodies almost. So I just do something like array merge, paste in a set of valid information, and then pass in the overrides to throw over top. The nice thing about that is when we go here where it says like webhook URL must be a valid URL, instead of having to say the secret key is this or the secret key is null or not pass the secret key, which leads to just like ambiguity and questions about like what my intentions were. Here I can say like valid params. Did I call it valid parameters? Let's call it valid params, shorter. I can say valid params and then pass through just the ones that I want to override. So when someone looks at this, they can see, oh, okay, this is going to expand into the set of valid parameters. And like the intention is clear that I'm trying to pass through a bunch of other parameters that should get through no problem, but this is the one that's interesting that we're doing something with, right? So we can say something like not a URL. And when we create it, I'm trying to decide if I care about setting these to... I think what I care about is actually having this set to like http example.com and then like my secret key. And then I want to verify that both of these are still the values that they were before. So we want to get back I think 422 is what Laravel sends back. And then also response, assert. What is it? Assert has errors. See, it's not going to be in the session, is it? So we want to use a JSON assertion. What is the nicest way to test the... Okay, this is what I want to see, because I can't remember off the top of my head what Laravel even returns as its default form validation stuff. So, okay, let's just comment this out for a second, run this and see it fail. We'll get it passing, and then we'll add another assertion to verify that the right error is there. Okay, so we can do this, validate. I will change this to use the new request validate thing eventually. And then just some really trivial rules, which in this case is just that webhook URL has to be a URL. I always use the array syntax, even though you can do like the pipe syntax or like no array if it's just one rule. Just seems more consistent to do the same thing every time. Okay, so what do we get now? So now we get a validation exception. So we need to turn this into with exception handling, so we know. So we catch that exception and turn it into a response. So now we get it passing. Now I can see what the JSON looks like. I'll make like a assertion about it. Yeah, so we have, it comes back with no errors key or anything. So we just want to make sure that the response does have a webhook URL key and that its contents are at least one. I feel like there should be a helper for this, because I don't like writing assertions about the error message, because it's like a sentence and it can be changed in config, and it's just not important to the test what the actual message is. It's just important that there is an error. That's more of a design thing than anything. So if we wanted to just do it like straight up, we could do like response, assert, count, 1, response, JSON, and if I'm not mistaken, test response, JSON can take, wow, it can't take any arguments. Feels like that should be able to take arguments. Okay. So this is kind of like the most non-expressive way to write this, but I think we'll pass. So if we wanted to, we could write a helper. You can actually macro the response, which is kind of cool. So we could do something like response, assert. So you know how there's this like assert session has errors thing? I'm kind of tempted to be able to write a helper that's like assert has errors that intelligently looks as a JSON or in the session, depending on like the content type of the response. That'd be kind of cool. But why don't we just do something like, is there like a assert JSON key? Like we might even be able to say like response, assert JSON, webhook URL, and point that to an empty array, which is, it's right, but it's not clear. Actually, you know what's even better? Why didn't I think of this? Assert array has key. So this is a PHP unit assertion. So we can say this assert array has key. Sort array has key. What order do these go in? Key and then the array. Okay. So the key we're looking for is the webhook URL key. And the array that we're looking for it in is actually just the response JSON. Yeah, so that's cleaner. Cool. Sweet. So let's I feel like we probably missed a bunch of opportunities to commit here. Yeah, we added a ton of tests. Okay, well, this is a cool thing to learn if you aren't familiar with it. I do this a lot when I write too much code but want my commits to be more logically grouped. We can go through here and just commit the stuff that we want to commit. So let's uncheck all of this and then find a test and commit that. So I think the first one that we did was testing that you can clear out an existing webhook URL. So I just drag down here. It's only going to commit those lines, which is cool. We might not be able to... What was the one? Assert can clear out existing webhook URL. So I think actually that doesn't rely on changing... man, this is hairy because there's so much that we did. Like this secret key thing, we would want to exclude that and exclude this one and exclude that because we weren't doing it at the time. So this is what we're going to do. It's cool to be able to do that stuff, but in this case, we've made it too hard for ourselves. So let's just say add more test coverage for updating webhook settings. See ya, TJ. And let's run the whole suite. Ooh, an error. Can clear out existing webhook URL. Oh, that's interesting. So it's failing because the webhook URL is null. This is that stupid thing where you have to make it nullable, right? This, to me, shouldn't be a thing. It doesn't even make sense. Nullable is not a validation rule. Anyways. Okay, whole file passes. Let's amend that commit. Okay, it's the whole test suite green. It is. So let's look for opportunities to refactor this controller now. It's so simple, but it seems fine. Model refresh. Interesting. So that just refreshes it in place. I dig that. I feel like that should exist. So what I wanted to do, which I thought would have been cool, is like we could tap this to get the product and then update it. But what I'm concerned about is that going to have the updated fields? Actually, it will. We don't have tests for that, though, because we're not really testing the response structure. But we can easily verify that by just going here and dumping response JSON. Let's see, that's secret key is null. Yeah. I'm not really concerned about testing that response value yet because I don't really have strong opinions about what it should even do. So I don't want to like codify that in a test and say, this is what I decided it should do. Instead, I just literally have no opinions. All I care about is the 200. I don't think any of my code is going to check any of the return values except the 200. So the other thing, like was mentioned in chat, is we could use that request array helper here, right? So we can actually replace this with request webhook URL secret key. For what it's worth, this syntax of being able to call the request global function with an array to go to a request only, I submitted that PR. I also submitted the PR for the request global function to exist at all. I'm accepting donations in exchange. Let's run the test again. Cool, all green. So let's commit that. So all we did was take this gross code and eliminate the need for variables. So we can say refactor controller product webhook settings controller update action. No more temporary variables. Temporarily? Ruining my day. Cool. So, I don't think we're going to have time to drive out any UI for this or anything with Vue, because I don't want these streams to be crazy long, and they've been like close to an hour so far. So, I think what I will do, though, is push this up to a new branch. So I have it to work on. And unless I get to working on this weekend, which is unlikely, then on Tuesday, when I do the next stream, we'll drive out kind of the client side piece of this, so we can create this webhooks endpoint and add the form for it and do the Vue sort of Ajax form submission and stuff like that. Yeah, so made some good progress anyways. Got some another endpoint added that does some useful things. And we'll hack on some more of this stuff next time. So let me know what you think about these streams. Hopefully they're fun and informative, and maybe pick up a trick or two. Let me know what you like about it, what you don't like about it, if you think they're too short or too long or just right. And anything that I can use to make these more enjoyable for people who come to check them out. So yeah, message me on Twitter or something like that. And cool. Thanks for tagging along. See you next time, everybody.